And at 10, Age of Apocalypse Nightcrawler. Kurt Darkholme, a native of the divergent timeline known as the Age of Apocalypse, was a member of the mutant resistance known as the X-Men. The timeline of the Age of Apocalypse diverged widely from the 616 timeline after the premature death of Charles Xavier in his early adulthood. As a result, the ancient mutant apocalypse ascended early and embarked on a reign of terror across the globe because, of course. Kurt, donning the codename Nightcrawler, stood with his fellow mutant heroes, the X-Men, in defiance of the genocidal anti-human regime of Apocalypse. Just like his 616 version, Nightcrawler could teleport, though it was through another dimension, and had a radius of 2 miles at a time, carrying 2 to 3 people along with himself. This version also favored teleporting sections of people away, in essence amputating them instantly, which is brutal. Not to mention the 2 freaking swords that he carries around because he can. Teleporting their heads somewhere else wasn't enough. This version wanted to be able to hack his opponent's limb from limb. And at 9, X-Men 2099. X-Men 2099 is a comic book series published by Marvel from 1993 to 1996 that chronicled the adventures of an X-Men team in the year 2099. It extends the vast Marvel 2099, universe, which features future versions of other popular Marvel characters such as Spider-Man and Hulk, and this team featured an ever-changing roster. However, the main core group of characters featured people like Desert Ghost, Skullfire, Bloodhawk, Mainstreak, Metalhead, Cerebra, Crystalline, Junkpile, La Lunatica, Serpentina, and Sham. The group is certainly more powerful given that they're in the 2099 universe, which saw future versions of heroes and villains gain all kinds of powerful upgrades, so needless to say, this group is going to be something to behold, with members like Metalhead being able to take on the properties of any metal that they touch, which also would be applied to adamantium or vibranium, or Junkpile, who can telekinetically draw metallic objects to himself and then use them to rebuild his body or add to his physical mass, making him basically resistant to harm. So yeah, certainly an interesting X-Men version. And at 8, Ultimate Cyclops. On Earth 1610, Scott's parents died in a plane crash when he was young, and he and his older brother Alex were separated, with Scott ending up in foster care. One day at school, he was beaten and humiliated by a bully for his inability to fight back and wet himself in front of his peers. Great. He returned home where his powers activated and accidentally killed his foster parents, Noah and Janelle. Great. At some point later in his life though, Scott was dating a young woman named Lorna Dane, until she dumped him for his brother Alex. That stings, man, especially since the relationship between the 2 brothers became even worse after that, and Scott became estranged to Alex, no longer speaking to him after he joined the X-Men sometime later. Although that's understandable. In the Ultimate Universe, Scott is able to absorb ambient energy from his environment such as sunlight and electricity and store it within his cells, metabolizing the energy in order to open a dimensional aperture through his eyes to unleash an exotic form of energy as heatless blasts of concussive force. He was also able to use the ambient collected energy to fly, deactivate and channel his energy blast through any part of his body besides his eyes, which is freaking nuts and sounds pretty dope, minus the whole being able to not control it thing. And at 7, Ultimate Wolverine. Wolverine suffered from amnesia. As a result, what little was known about his early life was both suspect and unverifiable. It is believed that at one point Wolverine had a wife and child, but they were supposedly murdered by Sabretooth. As both Wolverine and Sabretooth's memories had been tampered with in the past, this claim was highly suspect. However, Wolverine did own a wedding ring that served as his only link to the past, so maybe there's something there. This version of Wolverine also has a healing factor, disease resistance, which is useful nowadays, toxin resistance, damn I wish I had that now because, you know, toxicity, extended longevity, superhuman senses, superhuman strength, superhuman stamina, which must be why the ladies love him, superhuman agility, superhuman reflexes, and the classic adamantium-laced skeletal structure and retractable claws. Wolverine is also an experienced hand-to-hand combatant and is an expert assassin and can at least lift 800 pounds. Like bro, can you even lift bro? Spider-Man can lift twice that. That's not even with the symbiote suit, which I guess technically doesn't count because it's a separate thing, but still, come on Wolverine, step up your game. And at 6, Goddess of Thunder. What if Storm was the God of Thunder? That's in essence what the story of What If Volume 2 number 12 from 1990 asks. Well, in reality it's what if the X-Men stayed on Asgard, but still. After visiting Asgard, several members of the X-Men and New Mutants decided to stay this time, while those returning to Earth drove the X-Men into a new era. Many of those staying though found new loves. Wolfsbane found love in the Himprari, Prince of the Asgardian Wolves, while Rogue found love in Fandral the Dashing. King of the Warriors of Three. Cypher became a scholar, translating and reading scripts long dead in Asgard, while Cannonball married Kindra, the daughter of the Dwarf King. Nightcrawler and Sunspot became warriors, while Mirage became one of the Valkyrie. Magic became the Sorceress Supreme of Asgard and assumed the role once held by the Enchantress, and Storm became the new goddess of thunder, since Thor was trapped in the form of a Midgard frog. Yep, that's right, Throg! Karnilla and Hela conspired to steal Storm's soul with the Sword of Surtur, but were defeated. The sword was also then destroyed during the battle, and Loki was unable to draw his mystic energy from it, releasing Thor. But with Odin dead, Thor renounced his claim to the throne and returned to Earth, so Storm became the Queen of Asgard. Pretty dope. Halfway through, in at number 5, Bloodstorm. A street thief living in the streets of Egypt, the mutant Ororo Munro sealed her fate when she attempted to pickpocket a man who turned out to be Dracula. She eventually managed to free herself from the vampire's control and found a new purpose among the X-Men. Unfortunately, her thirst for blood overpowered her, which resulted in her killing at least both Beast and Professor X. Scott and Ororo developed romantic feelings for each other, but Scott was hesitant to act on them since he expected to return to his proper time along with the rest of the young X-Men. But also, you know, she's a vampire. This ain't Twilight. During a date though, Storm started to convince Scott to pursue his feelings, but the couple was attacked by Ahab and his hounds. During the ensuing fight, Bloodstorm was impaled by Ahab with his silver-coated spear. Fueled by rage, Scott got the upper hand, forcing Ahab to retreat, but Scott ended up having to carry Bloodstorm's corpse, and his arms dissolved into dust. Yeah. In addition to the powers of Storm from Earth 616, Bloodstorm can also shapeshift into a mist or a flock of bats, and can hypnotize people into doing her bidding with only a gaze, cause, you know, female vampires. She also feeds on a consenting Scott in an attempt to satiate her hunger and prevent her from going dark again. Only feed on those who consent. In at 4, New Exiles Rogue. Rogue's powers can be difficult to explain. Actually, not really. Simply put, Rogue's powers allow her to absorb powers from other people, even people who aren't super. She absorbs like memories and stuff. But she isn't really able to control it. She has slight control over her powers, but not enough to make her scary OP. However, the same cannot be said for the Rogue introduced in New Exiles, since this version of Rogue has complete control over her powers, technically speaking, since she can only absorb powers through skin-to-skin contact on her hands rather than her whole body, so if she just wears gloves, she's fine. She can also recall powers from people that she has already touched, which sounds weird now that I'm thinking about it, but still, this is freaking nuts. Imagine just like going around to like a mutant prison or whatever in the raft and just like high-fiving every villain there. You'd gain their abilities, right? And then just boom, you're basically a god. Even if you did that with the X-Men or the Avengers, but like not the Hulk, because I don't want to be like a giant green behemoth. But like maybe I would just like, I wouldn't have to turn into one. I'd just like have his super strength while he's in Hulk form. And I don't know how that would realistically work, okay? But it still sounds wicked. Getting close to the end, in at number 3, Mutant X Professor X. Charles Xavier of Earth 1298 believed in harmony between man and mutant, formed along with his friend Magus the X-Men, and led the team towards that peaceful goal. However, the day they fought the Shadow King, everything changed. The good in Xavier was corrupted, and he left the team to explore his powers further. When he returned, it was during an attack by the Juggernaut. Xavier fired a blast at Juggernaut, but it missed and killed Magneto's lover instead. Xavier left the X-Men for good after that, and traveled the world seeking out telepaths, who he captured and incarcerated around the globe, because of course he would. Xavier was also able to take over S.H.I.E.L.D. and absorbed a load of telepaths' powers into himself. This, in combination with the corruption from the Shadow King, amplified Professor X's powers to an unknown extent. But I think it's safe to say that that's pretty damn terrifying. Man, imagine Rogue absorbing those powers. Man, she should have been higher on the list. The hell? But ultimately, in at number 2, X-Men The End, Jean Grey. To say that the X-Men stories revolve around Jean Grey would be a slight overstatement, but in essence they always seem to at some point be trying to fight off the Phoenix Force from corrupting Jean or having to deal with her evil version. However, the version of Jean from the X-Men The End is the most powerful version we've seen, having fully embraced the Phoenix Force and merged with her evil doppelganger or clone or whatever the hell it is. The End stories revolve around various characters meeting their end or having some stories come to an end, which we can see when Cassandra Nova attacks the X-Men and the Shi'ar Imperial Guard. She then begins to erase Xavier's mind. Marvel Girl summons her residual Phoenix Force energies and engages Cassandra in psychic battle, but Jean Grey, once again the Phoenix, uses her powers to heal Cable when suddenly she and Cyclops are killed by a psionic blast fired by a mind-controlled Marvel Girl. So Rip. Cassandra's astral form leaps out of Marvel Girl's mind and merges with the Phoenix Force, and there's a whole lot more to the story though, so if you're interested in it, I highly recommend reading it because that will do it way more justice than I can. Cause, oh, damn. Finally, in number 1, Brother Mutant. Brother Mutant was created in the Exiles universe of Earth 127 and made his first appearance in Exiles number 85 from 2006. Brother Mutant was an amalgamated being created when the Scarlet Warlock tried to imbue Magneto with the adamantium-laced skeleton of Wolverine and failed, causing Wolverine, Magneto, Quicksilver, Mesmero, and Scarlet Warlock to merge into a single being, which is ironic because that ends up in essence giving Magneto an adamantium-laced skeleton. Since Brother Mutant was capable of using the combined powers of all 5 characters who inhabited him, which is absolutely nuts considering how a gender-bent Scarlet Witch was combined with Quicksilver, Magneto with Wolverine's healing factor and claws. So yeah, I'm sure you can see why this guy is number 1. Various James Howletts from other realities were dispatched by the Time Breakers to stop Brother Mutant but were unsuccessful, only defeating him when the Exiles and one last group of Wolverines just wrecked him, I guess. Imagine Rogue absorbing these powers. The Rogue should have been number 1. What am I doing?
Coming in at number 10, we have the bloodthirsty vampire Wolverine. In an alternate universe where vampires have launched an all-out assault on the United States, most of the X-Men are bidden and mind-controlled by the Lord of the Vampires, Dracula. Unfortunately for Dracula, however, Wolverine's healing ability allows him to regain his own mental control despite becoming a vampire, and thus is able to overthrow Dracula and become leader of the vampires. Consumed by a bloodlust that amplifies his already pretty frightening rage, Wolverine and his vampire army are able to wipe out most other superpowered life on the planet, only finally being defeated by the combined forces of Doctor Strange and the Punisher as a vampire hunting combination. Coming in at number 9, we have the evil Iceman hailing from the Age of Apocalypse universe. In a world where Apocalypse has taken over mutant kind and only Magneto and a few X-Men are capable of fighting back, the usually optimistic Bobby Drake was forged into a heartless warrior, giving him much stronger control of his ice powers than other depictions of Iceman, and becoming a living streak of ice that can travel instantaneously through water. This version of Iceman would eventually betray his teammates and ally himself with Dark Beast, and was only eventually able to be defeated by having his head shoved inside of a furnace. Which I guess is one way to kill an ice-based villain, but geez, that's a little bit overkill. Coming in at number 8, we have the brainwashed Wolverine of Earth 14850. At one point in the regular Marvel universe, Wolverine was captured and brainwashed by Hydra in order to assassinate the Avengers, but luckily was able to be deprogrammed before he did any real damage. On this alternate Earth, however, the deprogramming never took place, and Wolverine's killing spree of superpowered heroes was able to last for months. Armed with all of his incredible abilities, absolutely no remorse, and the addition of Hydra-developed teleporting technology that nullified even Wolverine's usual weaknesses, and this was a horrifying enemy that even the Avengers couldn't handle. Coming in at number 7, we have Basilisk, the twisted, mask-wearing variant of Cyclops. On an alternate world where anti-mutant sentiment is somehow even higher than the regular Marvel universe, Scott Summers' backstory is made even more tragic. Killing 7 people, including his own parents when his powers first manifest, Cyclops is locked away in the prison Alcatraz and forced to wear a mask made of ruby quartz to control his laser vision. The evil governor of the prison even goes so far as to mutilate Cyclops and remove his eyelids, making the twisted basilisk mask the only method Scott has to control his deadly abilities, a favor that Cyclops would repay by killing the governor and launching a prison break that would eventually lead him back to this universe's X-Men. Coming in at number 6, we're taking a bit of a break from the comics with the Wolverine symbiote from the video game Spider-Man: Web of Shadows. In this game's story, Wolverine has traveled to New York City to deal with a growing symbiote infestation, and even briefly fights Spider-Man when he believes the wall crawler is actually Venom. Unfortunately for Wolverine, he finds himself overwhelmed by actual symbiotes on top of a church and attacks Spider-Man again as the Wolverine symbiote. With all of his usual healing abilities on top of all the usual symbiote enhancements, this version of Wolverine might just be the scariest he's ever been. Coming in at number 5, we have the Ultimate Universe version of Jamie Madrox, aka Multiple Man. Multiple Man's powers have always been a bit overwhelming, with the ability to seemingly create an unlimited amount of duplicates of himself as long as they're generated one at a time. In the Ultimate Universe, however, this power was pushed beyond its limits when Jamie allied himself with the Brotherhood of Mutants and created tens of thousands of bomb-wielding versions of himself with no regard for his own life. While the Ultimatum event featured many shocking moments, few are as existentially disturbing as literal thousands of clones strapping explosives to themselves just to wipe out several superhero bases. Coming in at number 4, we have the possessed Professor X from Earth 6141. During the event known as M-Day, when Scarlet Witch wiped out most of mutant kind, the extremely powerful telepath known as the Shadow King was able to escape the loss of his powers by transferring his mind through the multiverse to the alternate world of Earth 6141, where he was able to successfully possess the mind of this world's Charles Xavier before the X-Men were even formed. Combining both of their telepathic might, this version of Xavier turned all of his students into perfect killing machines, and placed them firmly under his psychic control, getting them to kill any superheroes who tried to interfere in the Shadow King's schemes. While eventually defeated by the team known as New Excalibur, this group of Shadow X-Men left their world shaking in terror. Coming in at number 3, we have the vampire variant of Storm, aka Bloodstorm. In an alternate reality where Storm was bitten by Dracula before discovering the X-Men, Storm came to Charles Xavier for help with her condition. Unfortunately, her bloodlust was too strong and she wound up feasting on both the Professor and Beast. Horrified at what she'd done, this version of Storm would eventually try and redeem herself after she found herself as part of an invasion force attacking the main Marvel universe. While she eventually bonded and made amends with the Beast of this dimension, her combination of weather controlling and vampire powers made Bloodstorm one of the more powerful X-Men variants that the regular X-Men have ever had to face. Coming in at number 2, we have one of the most powerful enemies the X-Men have ever seen with Brother Mutant. On Earth 127, a male variant of the Scarlet Witch, known as the Scarlet Warlock, attempted to cast a spell that would transfer Wolverine's adamantium skeleton to Magneto, thus giving Magneto an incredible power boost given his magnetic abilities. However, something with the spell went wrong, and the Scarlet Warlock, Wolverine, Magneto, Quicksilver, and the villain Mesmero were all merged into a singular being known as Brother Mutant. With all 5 of these mutants' powers combined into one villainous figure, Brother Mutant was such a powerful threat that a multiversal team of Wolverines had to be assembled specifically to stop him, just to ensure that all of that power wasn't unleashed on the rest of the Marvel multiverse. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have the one and only Magneto from the Ultimate Universe. Unlike a lot of the other entries on this list, this Magneto variant doesn't have any additional powers or physical mutations to make him even more intimidating, but rather is terrifying just because of his sheer willpower. This version of Magneto is much more cynical and dark than the complex figure of the regular Marvel universe, and when he believed his children had been killed by Doctor Doom, Ultimate Magneto was furious enough to begin a global genocide. Switching the polarity of Earth's poles with his magnetic powers and beginning the incredibly controversial event known as Ultimatum, this version of Magneto caused the deaths of millions of people and dozens of beloved superheroes, and was only finally able to be stopped when Cyclops put him out of his misery with a laser blast to the head. Coming in at number 10, we have the Wild West themed Xavier Gang. In an alternate Marvel universe that bears an incredible resemblance to America in the 1800s, a band of outlaws known as the Xavier Gang are plaguing a small town in Arizona, with every mutant member of the team being individually mind-controlled by a distant and diabolical version of Professor Charles Xavier. Using this team of the X-Men as puppets made up of both superheroes and supervillains, this Western crook version of Xavier was only defeated once a multiverse-spanning team of X-Men showed up to put an end to his mind-controlling ways. Coming in at number 9, we have the bloodthirsty vampire Wolverine. In an alternate universe where vampires have launched an all-out assault on the United States, most of the X-Men are bitten and mind-controlled by the Lord of the Vampires, Dracula. Unfortunately for Dracula, however, Wolverine's healing ability allows him to regain his own mental control despite becoming a vampire, and thus is able to overthrow Dracula and become leader of the vampires. Consumed by a bloodlust that amplifies his already pretty frightening rage, Wolverine and his vampire army are able to wipe out most other superpowered life on the planet, only finally being defeated by the combined forces of Doctor Strange and the Punisher as a vampire hunting combination. Coming in at number 8, we have perhaps the most infamous X-Men palette swap with Dark Beast. Originally hailing from the alternate timeline known as the Age of Apocalypse, this version of Hank McCoy was a twisted mad scientist working under the tutelage of Mr. Sinister, striving to create the most powerful mutants possible, no matter the cost. Although this messed up future would be prevented by the X-Men, Dark Beast was wily enough to find a way into the main Marvel universe and avoid his existence being erased. Ever since, he's been a persistent thorn in the X-Men's side, and a particular burden on Beast, who would much rather that someone didn't use his genius for evil. Coming in at number 7, we have the possessed Shadow Professor X from Earth 6141. Isn't that a mouthful? During the event known as M-Day, when Scarlet Witch wiped out most of mutant kind, the extremely powerful telepath known as the Shadow King was able to escape the loss of his powers by transferring his mind throughout the multiverse to the alternate world of Earth 6141, where he was able to successfully possess the mind of this world's Charles Xavier before the X-Men were even formed. Combining both of their telepathic might, this version of Xavier turned all of his students into perfect killing machines and placed them firmly under his psychic control, getting them to kill any superheroes who tried to interfere in the Shadow King's schemes. Coming in at number 6, we have the brainwashed Wolverine of Earth 14850. At one point in the regular Marvel universe, Wolverine was captured and brainwashed by Hydra in order to assassinate the Avengers, but luckily was able to be deprogrammed before he did any real lasting damage. On this alternate Earth, however, the deprogramming never took place, and Wolverine's killing spree of superpowered heroes was able to last for months. Armed with all of his incredible abilities, absolutely no remorse, and the addition of Hydra-developed teleporting technology that nullified even Wolverine's usual weaknesses, and this was a horrifying enemy that even the Avengers couldn't handle. Coming in at number 5, we have the group known as Sinister's Six, and surprisingly, this isn't just a bunch of Spider-Man villains. A group of 6 red-eyed clones of the X-Men working for Mr. Sinister, this villainous group did have a few run-ins with the Wallcrawler, but only during the series known as Spider-Man and the X-Men, so it all works out. These evil clones were initially an intense obstacle preventing the real X-Men from getting closer to Mr. Sinister's schemes, but would ironically eventually be defeated by the same condition that seems to always follow Spider-Man related clone stories, cellular degeneration. Better luck next time, Sinister Six. Coming in at number 4, we have the twisted Bobby Drake, aka Iceman of the Age of Apocalypse universe. In a world where Apocalypse has taken over mutant kind and only Magneto and a few X-Men are capable of fighting back, the usually optimistic Bobby Drake was forged into a heartless warrior, giving him much stronger control of his ice powers than other depictions of the character, and becoming a living streak of ice that can travel instantly through water to lethal effect. This version of Iceman would eventually betray his teammates and ally himself with Dark Beast, and was only eventually able to be defeated by having his head shoved inside a furnace, a surefire way to finally melt this evil Iceman. Coming in at number 3, we have the vampire variant of Storm, known fittingly enough as Bloodstorm. In an alternate reality where Storm was bitten by Dracula before discovering the X-Men, Storm came to Charles Xavier for help with her condition. Unfortunately, her bloodlust was too strong and she wound up feasting on both the Professor and Beast. Horrified at what she'd done, this version of Storm would eventually try and redeem herself after she found herself as part of an invasion force attacking the main Marvel universe. While she eventually bonded and made amends with the Beast of this dimension, her combination of weather controlling and vampire powers made Bloodstorm one of the more powerful X-Men variants that the regular X-Men ever had to face. Coming in at number 2, we have the one and only Magneto from the Ultimate Universe. Magneto might often be an enemy of the X-Men, but in recent years has allied himself with them more often than not. This version of Magneto, however, is much more cynical and dark than the more complex figure of the regular Marvel Universe. And when he believed his children had been killed by Doctor Doom, Ultimate Magneto was furious enough to begin a global genocide. Switching the polarity of Earth's poles with his magnetic powers and beginning the incredibly controversial event known as Ultimatum, this version of Magneto caused the deaths of millions of people and dozens of beloved superheroes, and was only finally stopped when Cyclops put him out of his misery with a laser blast directly to the head. And finally, coming to our top spot, we have another version of Professor Charles Xavier, or more specifically, the part of his mind known as Onslaught. For years, Professor X has done all he can to achieve peace and prosperity for mutant kind, while not allowing his anger at humanity to get the better of him. But after all this time of psychically repressing every dark and evil thought he ever had, Xavier had made the perfect ticking time bomb. And when he briefly had a mental battle with his best frenemy, Magneto, a portion of Magneto's less held back personality combined with all of the darkness in Xavier's heart and created one of the most dangerous psychic creations of all time, the villain known as Onslaught. A personality made up of the worst possible versions of both Professor X and Magneto, Onslaught is the pinnacle of what can happen when the X-Men go bad.
Number 10. Noir. In Marvel's Noirverse of Earth 90214, the X-Men are actually troubled youth and delinquents who are brought together by Charles Xavier, a controversial psychiatrist who believed that sociopathy was the next state of human evolution. Instead of attempting to redeem the youth whom he took into his school, the Xavier School for Exceptionally Wayward Youth, he worked to train them even further in their criminal arts. While some of them were exceptionally dangerous, at the end of the day, this version of the X-Men were just young criminals who were humans. So yeah, but they did have guns, so there is that. Number 9. 1602. The X-Men of Earth 311 are surprisingly powerful for the time period in which they live, 1602. In this reality, mutants are instead called Witchbreed, and the team of X-Men are an Elizabethan reflection of the Earth 616 original team. Carlos Xavier is their teacher and head, while Scotius Summerisle is their leader and is joined by the ice-wielding Robert Trefusis, a beast like Henry McCoy, and the powerful telekinetic and telepath disguised as a boy, Jean Grey. Together, this team managed to help save their reality when a rift was caused due to all these heroes basically coming into existence so early, destabilizing it. In the end, Jean died from overuse of her powers, making her weaker than her 616 counterpart, but overall, the team is still pretty strong, especially for this time period, like I said. And friends, before we move on to our next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists like it, I don't know if there's 10 more alternate versions of the X-Men, but we can definitely do something in this realm. Be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. And also, go check out our Top 10 Nerd Elite, our new channel, and make sure you subscribe to that where we're gonna have lots of bonus content for you. Number 8. Earth Z. The X-Men were some of the last heroes standing up against the zombie horde on Earth 2149, or Earth Z. While Professor X was quickly devoured, Magneto stepped in to become the leader and encouraged the X-Men to fight to kill their opponents, as opposed to just, trying to hold them off. Otherwise, he warned the heroes would easily be overcome. Gone were the days of fighting to incapacitate their enemies. Wolverine himself seemed very much on board with this, and when Nick Fury called a meeting of the surviving heroes to explain the situation on the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier, many of the X-Men could be spotted amongst their numbers. Surviving in Marvel Zombies even just for that initial wave is pretty impressive, considering how many iconic and powerful heroes didn't make it. In fact, when they're with Nick Fury, I'm pretty sure I counted 9 of them, which I think is pretty Pretty impressive. Number 7. Days of Future Past. The X-Men team from Earth 811 didn't do too hot and ultimately ended up trapped in a post-apocalyptic situation where the world was ending and Sentinels were killing just about everything. Although they ultimately failed in their attempt to travel to the past to fix it to save the future, with Rachel Summers transporting Kitty Pryde back in time to the body of her younger self, Kitty still found a way to save the day when she returned as Widget, and with help from an alternate Excalibur team and alternate Rachel Summers, deprogrammed the Sentinels, turning them into Protectrons of a sort who would work to defend the mutants instead of destroy them. Basically, I feel like Days of Future Past is just powerful because of Kitty, but that's just my opinion. Anyways, Kitty's pretty powerful, Kitty and Rachel, so that's all we really need. Number 6. Ultimate, or Ultimates, if you will. Earth 1610. In the ultimate reality, the X-Men were born out of a break between Professor Charles Xavier and Magneto's Eric Lensher. Here, the two were friends and like-minded individuals for a time who together founded the Brotherhood of Mutants. They lived together with their students in peace and harmony on the Savage Land, until a falling out drove them apart, due to Magneto believing in ruling humankind and Xavier disagreeing with that. Magneto was the one responsible for Professor X losing his ability to walk and ending up in a wheelchair, and Professor X ended up creating his own mutant group called the X-Men. Later, during the X-Men's fight against Magneto during Ultimatum, many members of the team died, but a few of the most powerful did manage to survive. The team members that survived included Jean Grey, Kitty Pryde, Colossus, Rogue, Iceman, and Storm. And I think that was pretty much it, actually. Ooh. Number 5. The Brotherhood of Evil X-Men from the Future. So this team isn't really a straight up alternate X-Men team, as the name implies. I'm cheating just a little bit here. However, they did pose as the true future X-Men when they showed up in Battle of the Atom, and I really like them, so I'm just gonna count them, cause I do the lists, so I get to decide what folks we include. Cool? Cool. This team also has some of my favorite overall members, with Charles Xavier II appearing as the leader, and also boasting of a roster including and formerly including Zorn, Jean Grey, an Ice Hulk version of Bobby Drake, an insane version of Beast, Raze, Deadpool, and a much more powerful Molly Hayes, who doesn't succumb to exhaustion after using her super strength. Which is pretty scary, because Molly Hayes is pretty strong. Number 4. The Dark X-Men. The Dark X-Men is Norman Osborn's team of mutants who were brought together in response to unrest in the mutant community during the events of Dark Reign. Honestly, I feel like between number 5 on this list and number 4, it really could have gone either way, so let me know if you feel like, you know, the future fake X-Men should have gone above, because I was very on the fence about this. Initially, Norman Osborn was not allowed to get involved with the mutants, but after riots broke out, he was able to finally make his own X-Men team, which he declared to the public was the real X-Men team, declaring the real X-Men team Outlaws. Fortunately, it turned out both the team leader Emma Frost and Namor the Submariner, who, when pitted against the true X-Men, turned on their own dark X-Men teammates. I didn't even talk about the other people on this roster, but there were lots of cool people. Number 3. Extreme X-Men. Extreme X-Men Volume 2 is an X-Men series and a team that takes a page out of the Exiles book, not to be confused with Chris Claremont's Extreme X-Men roster led by Storm in Volume 1 of that series. This version, written by Greg Pak, is a multiversal team of heroes who hail from various alternate realities. Seriously, I love this series. It's 1, really pretty, and 2, it's just really cool. The team is typically led by the main continuity Dazzler, Allison Blair. The team roster included such amazing members as Sage, Earth 12025 Hercules, boyfriend of the James Howlett of that reality, the James Howlett from Earth 12025 himself, Emmeline Frost Summers, an OP godlike immortal version of Emma Frost who is married to Scott in her reality of Earth 52012, Corporal Scott Summers from the American Civil War based reality of Earth 70213, a younger version of Kurt nicknamed Kid Nightcrawler, and a floating Xavier head. So many great people. Number 2. Age of Apocalypse. I would say the Age of Apocalypse version of the X-Men has to be one of the toughest versions out there, which shouldn't come as a surprise as, like eventually happened on Earth Z, Magneto also kinda ended up becoming their leader after the death of Xavier. Although in the Age of Apocalypse reality of Earth 295, many things are different. Rogue and Magneto end up getting kinda married, with another kind of odd relationship developing between Storm and Quicksilver that also kinda makes sense given this reality, and Cyclops ends up working for Apocalypse, who rules the world. Another major difference is that in this reality, Charles was actually killed before he could ever form the X-Men, meaning that Magneto was their one true leader here. Number 1. Future X-Men. Personally, I think the future X-Men that we meet in Battle of the Atom, the real future X-Men of Earth 13729 that is, are pretty nuts. I mean, they have Widget on their team. Widget! And they also have a wizard version of Iceman who goes by the name Ice Wizard now, and Wiccan as one of their members as well. I don't know about you, but it doesn't really sound like it gets better than that. Jubilee also takes up the mantle of Wolverine in this reality, which is adorable, and Logan goes on to become the new professor, being known as Professor Logan, which I love.
Number 10. Bloodstorm. Now, Storm is already mistress of the elements, so quite powerful and quite interesting. But what happens when she becomes a vampire? Now, this has happened briefly in main continuity, but in the Mutant X universe, it became a permanent change. The Mutant X comic series was published from 1998 to 2001, and as mentioned, it saw a very different Storm. This was after she was bitten by Dracula. Here, she was not saved, but instead became a full-fledged creature of the night. She of course had vows not to kill, so she had the vampire dilemma, which she solved by hiring some of her former teammates to let her drink from them, like Kitty Pryde. She would eventually leave the X-Men and join a team called the Six. She also turns Gambit into a vampire, even though she warns him he'll regret it, and he does. Spoilers. Listen when people warn you. Bloodstorm became a breakout character of this series. Number 9. New Sun Gambit. Speaking of Gambit, let's take a look at one of his alternate versions. This is New Sun Gambit, and he hails from Earth 9921. Gambit actually has enormous power potential that was quashed by Mr. Sinister in the main continuity, but that continuity is not all. In this other universe, he was trained to use his abilities even before he had them, and then when this was combined with his full potential and a mystic ceremony, he became something else altogether. The only thing is, the awakening of all these abilities would create a shockwave that would destroy his Earth, forcing him to travel around, and of course he ended up on the 616 Earth, where he ended up befriending Gambit and trying to help him along his way, but didn't tell him who he was. It was after his reveal and Gambit's subsequent disgust that he changed his name to New Sun. Some fans like seeing the full unleashed potential on display of Gambit. Number 8. Basilisk. Not all alternate versions that people like have happy outcomes. Case in point, Basilisk from Earth 11326, an Earth also known as Age of X. Here, Cyclops was incarcerated in a mutants-only facility after the manifestation of his powers as a teenager killed several people, including his parents. He captured the attention of the prison warden Arcade because of his power set, so he made him this very special mask. It looks a lot like the Skull mask from Persona 5, and it's something that people like about this character. In fact, for many, it's what makes him cooler. It is a very menacing-looking mask. Now, a lot of this universe had to do with Legion, one of its personalities, and manifesting another world. So for some, it was just a cool concept in general. The mask looked great. Loved the mask. Number 7. Soldier Supreme. Here we have an amalgamated character from Warp World. This was the universe that was created when Gamora had the Infinity Gauntlet, put everybody's souls into the Soul Gem, and then folded that universe in half. As a result of this, the characters were merged and fused together. So you have Marvel characters smushed, and one of those was Captain America, Steve Rogers, and Doctor Strange, Stephen Strange. So I mean, they kind of already had the same name, just spelled differently, so it made it a bit easier. Back there, Dr. Stephen Rogers, but now with a PH. Their stories actually don't fuse too badly. It's World War II, and Stephen Rogers is contracted for a super secret soldier experiment, only it turns out it's a cover for a mystical ceremony instead of for, you know, the scientific one that he actually undergoes. But these mystic rituals still end up enhancing his strength and allowing him to connect with the occult, and he becomes Soldier Supreme. So he has Cap's cowl, but he still has like a mustache. And he was actually one of the heroes who objected to Warp World being completely destroyed at the end of the arc by Adam Warlock. So Warlock found a way to let it still exist and let these characters still exist. It was one of those loopholes. Stephen Rogers did that and kept being a hero. Number 6. Old Man Logan. Would any of our nerd lists be complete without mentioning Old Man Logan? Yes they would, but it just keeps coming up. It's a staple here on Top 10 Nerd. Well, this story is one of the most popular alternate universe stories out there, and it has a famously gross confrontation between the Hulk and Wolverine, or Logan, because he's not Wolverine anymore in this story. Here we have a grizzled old man Logan fighting his way across a supervillain-controlled America, trying to keep his claws sheathed after what he did, which, spoilers, was somehow managing to kill most of the X-Men. This was because he fell for an illusion created by Mysterio. folio. This is a must-read for many fans and a fave Wolverine story for others. Number 5. X-Apes. The X-Men are monkeys, or rather apes. This, funnily enough, spawned off of the Marvel Zombies universe and event. Basically, they're trying anything. That event was just so popular. This did not turn out to be quite the hit that was, but I mean, few things can. But this universe still has its fans. Actually, everybody in this universe are apes or monkeys or animals of some kind. So really, if you enjoy this concept, it's just the whole universe, and you have people like the Ape Avengers and Dr. Octopus. It's made for a certain type of pun-loving individual. It's a bit niche, but for some it sparks joy. Number 4. Which breed? For this we have to go for Neil Gaiman of Sandman fame's 1602 Marvel Comics contribution. It is also an alternate universe story. In this universe, the Marvel universe is all happening by Elizabethan times, 1602. There, mutants exist, but they are known as witch breed. This is because they are thought to be the spawn of demons or witches. Or both. They are creatures to be hunted down, but they find safe haven in Xavier's select college for sons of gentlefolk, a school that causes great concern for Sir Nicholas Fury because he sees the potential of all these students as soldiers, which, let's not lie, that's part of what Xavier is doing. Again, this is a universe where people tend to like the whole thing, but the X-Men stand out as a distinct part, or rather, the witch breed. Number 3. X-Babies. Versions of your favorite characters as babies or kids. This is a concept that is either really fun or incredibly lame, depending upon who you're talking to. So the X-Babies are clones created by Mojo in the Mojoverse. This was probably inspired by an even earlier story where he had just taken the X-Men and turned them into kids, again for entertainment. Because you know, if anything goes on long enough, be it show, series, whatever, you're gonna get two things. You're gonna get a child episode and you're gonna get a musical episode. Now the X-Babies are a concept that is short-lived, but they are usually returned to. There is even an A-Babies versus X-Babies. Again, how cool you'll find these tots depends upon your tolerance for baby-related shenanigans. Number 2, Earth X. The version of the X-Men here are depressing, but all of Earth X is depressing actually. After an experiment of Reed Richards goes wrong, or seemingly that's what happened, for once it's not Reed's fault, I know, shock and awe, a population of superpowered beings is produced all over the Earth, and the world drastically alters. To quote The Incredibles, when everyone's super, no one is. Suddenly there's not as much of a reason to hate and fear the X-Men, and they've largely fallen apart. The one character people tend to remember the most that sticks out when they first think of this is Wolverine, who's got a beer gut and is married to Jean Grey, except it's not Jean, it's Madeline Pryor, but he keeps calling her Jean, and it's just sad. Now, how exactly is this cooler, you may be asking? Well, it's all in the depiction. It's unique, it's memorable, and part of a well-received work. So for many, that's what makes it cool. And finally, in at number 1, Vampire Wolverine. Wolverine, Lord of the Vampires. If you thought people loved Vampire Storm, then you know that they enjoy Vampire Wolverine. Wolverine has been a vampire more than once. You have what-if stories like the aforementioned Wolverine, Lord of the Vampires. But you also have arcs like Curse of the Mutants, which would also be the arc that left Jubilee as a vampire for a bit. Many have fond memories of the what-if story, where upon successfully turning Storm, Dracula then turns all the rest of the X-Men. Only because of Wolverine's healing factor, he figures out how to use his powers way faster than everybody else, and so he dethrones Dracula and takes over as leader of the vampires. In fact, he leads the new vampire X-Men to take over New York. It's up to the bizarre combination of Doctor Strange and the Punisher to take him down.
Number 10. Dirty Bomb Wolverine. Why does this sound like some sort of sexy nickname for Wolverine? It really is not. Instead, this alternate version of Wolverine is an empty clone that was created in the current Wolverine series and used to basically burn vampires loyal to Dracula from the inside out. This all went down in a battle in the effort of freeing Omega Red from Dracula's hold over him, while also getting back at Drac, who was attempting to get his hands on Wolverine so he could use his blood to allow his own vampire army to walk around during the day, making them obviously much more powerful. Omega Red's plan to stop Dracula was to give him what he wanted, which meant making a clone of Wolverine who was gene edited to have blood that was thick with photonic cells, similar to the ones found in plankton, which produce their own luminescence. Basically, the blood of the Dirty Bomb clone Wolverine then had the opposite effect on the vamps who consumed it, meaning they would be burnt from the inside out as opposed to being able to walk in the day. Having a gene edited clone of Wolverine is a frightening prospect, and a clone who is used simply as a decoy and bomb is pretty morally scary. And then there is the added factor of how it made the vampires feel to learn of it. And I'm sure that they were properly terrified before they were all killed. Minus Dracula, of course, who got away in the end, like he always does. Although the mutants won the battle in issue number 12 of the current Wolverine series, they did not win the war. Still continues with the Vampire Nation. Number 9. Darkclaw. If you find the Batman scary, and I mean, who doesn't? He is often drawn with the intention of looking intimidating and scary enough to strike fear into the hearts of goons and villains all across Gotham. Then take a seat, because Darkclaw is definitely going to spook you a bit here. Darkclaw comes to us from the Amalgam universe, where he was created as a cross between Marvel's Wolverine and DC's Batman, blending together two of the big two's most popular and frightening heroic characters. He's got the backstory and fortune of Batman, but still boasts of the adamantium-coated skeleton and healing factor of Wolverine, meaning that Logan Wayne is not an alternate version that you would want to mess with. And all my ghouls out there, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more Wolverine lists, be sure to let us know by clicking that like button and commenting down below. Also, if you click like and if you smash subscribe, you can call me Vampy. Number 8. Phoenix. One of the most terrifying versions of Wolverine in terms of what he could be capable of has to be the Wolverine from the alternate future, where Thor ends up as Allfather and Loki wipes out all of humanity, just to make his brother suffer, of course. In this dystopian future, Wolverine himself ends up being chosen to become the new host for the Phoenix Force after his own death. Phoenix Logan was obviously capable of many different insane feats due to him being imbued with, well, the Phoenix Force, even managing to save Loki from the Celestials. Pretty impressive. However, Phoenix Wolverine would prove to be not quite as scary when facing a future version of Doom, who obliterated him. But Logan, being imbued with the power of the Phoenix Force, meant that he could resurrect, and in order to ensure that Doom would be defeated this time around, he sacrificed himself to empower Allfather Thor's weapon Mjolnir in the continued battle. Also, that would be the one really powerful Mjolnir. It's like Mjolnir with the Phoenix Force. That's crazy. Number 7. Akahiro. Sure, Daken is a character all his own, but I also counted a clone that was used as a dirty bomb against vampires, so I feel like if I do that, it would be really insulting if we did not talk about Akahiro. Daken was an alternate version of Wolverine during Dark Reign, where Norman Osborn basically took over in the comics, where he forged the organization Hammer and his very own Dark Avengers. The Dark Avengers were made up of former and current villains repurposed and remarketed as Avengers replacements. Osborn actually tried to recruit some of the original Avengers after they'd been disbanded, but of course they pretty much all refused. They were like, we know you're Norman Osborn, so. Daken was recruited to be Dark Wolverine on the team, and while Akahiro might not be quite as villainous in the comics currently, at the time he was still pretty much one of the baddies. Daken is a terrifying alternate because he has less of a moral code than his dad, who already isn't known for his light touch when it comes to dealing with his opponents. Daken, like his father, is also a skilled fighter and assassin who was trained since he was a child to become a killer and a weapon for Romulus to use against Logan. Oh, and if you're not familiar with him, he also has pretty much all the powers of his dad. His claws are just a little bit different. Actually, Daken also has pheromone powers, so he's not really more powerful than his dad in terms of skill, but power set, just saying. Number 6. Wolverine Noir. Jim Logan is one of the noir versions of Wolverine that we see in the Marvel Noirverse. Another shows up in the X-Men Noir series, but with a different backstory and also kind of a different name. He's a bootlegger, but the one we're focusing on here is a detective. Honestly, a lot of the noir versions of heroes are detectives. But back then in the stories, everyone was a detective, so I'm fine with it. Either way, I personally think that narrative fits Wolverine's power set just a little bit better, being a skilled tracker himself. Jim in Wolverine Noir is part of Logan and Logan, a detective agency that boasts that they're the best there is at what we do. The whole look of the series is very creepy, very noir, and it also draws a lot on the backstory of Wolverine given to us in his origin series, where we learn of how he was mistreated as a boy, his relation to Dog, and his childhood love and friend Rose. In this version of the story, Logan's father is a very religious preacher who often forces young Jim to sit and listen to his sermons while he rehearses them. Number 5. Old Man Logan. Definitely one of the scariest alternate versions of Wolverine out there when it comes to the reality in which he resides. Old Man Logan hails from the alternate reality of Earth 807128. In this reality, it was Wolverine himself who was responsible for the death of the X-Men, as he was tricked by Mysterio into slaughtering all of them when the villains took over and ended up finally winning the day. Flash forward to the future, where Wolverine is old and he doesn't go by that codename anymore because, well, it brings back pretty painful memories, which he still is haunted by to this day. Instead, he's simply known as Logan. But even though he tries to stay away from heroics, retiring, and even settling down with a wife and kids, he can't seem to escape his vigilante ways. After his family are killed when he is late to pay forced protection money to the Hulk gang, Logan himself seeks revenge, inevitably and gruesomely freeing pretty much everyone from the villainous nature of deranged Pappy Banner and his inbred family. That Hulk gang. Oh boy. Number 4. Cancerverse Wolverine. We don't know that much about Cancerverse Wolverine, who hails from the Earth of 10011, but we do know, like many others who hail from this reality, Wolverine here is horrifying to behold, and he is part of the X-Men, spelt E-X-Men. In the Cancerverse, death was completely eradicated, which you might think would bring about a sort of paradise in the cosmos, but instead this change had, well, the opposite effect, mutating everything into one big horror show. Turns out death wasn't quite as bad as we all thought, and that life, left unchecked, is actually horrifying. Who would have guessed? Number 3. X-24. In the film Logan, X-24 was an even more deadly clone than X-23. This was a clone version of Wolverine genetically engineered to be as powerful as Wolverine in his prime, perhaps even more so, and who was much more easy to control and manipulate. Not as free thinking and just more of a straight up berserker. So basically like Wolverine without any of his moral code at all, or any inhibitions. This made X-24 the perfect weapon to be used against Wolverine himself and escapee Laura, aka X-23. It took a lot to take down X-24, and his perceived strength and ruthlessness in the film made him a terrifying nemesis to watch. I don't know about you, but I got so anxious every time he showed up on screen in that initial watch through of Logan. Even when I rewatch it now, I'm like, Logan, no, X-24 is coming for you, run! Number 2. Lord of the Vampires. This alternate version of Wolverine comes to us from the What If series Volume 2, Issue 24. Here, the fate of the world was forever changed when, during the X-Men's battle with Dracula, Storm ultimately decided to remain with Dracula. This changed the course of history forever, as Wolverine and the other heroes were captured and transformed into vampires themselves. However, Wolverine's willpower proved much too strong for Dracula to tame or control, and so he was challenged and later defeated by Wolverine, who then became the new Lord of the Vampires. What's scarier than a Terminator-style clone version of Wolverine? How about a vampire version of Wolverine who rules over all of the other vampires and can turn anyone into his loyal thrall? Number 1. Zombieverse Wolverine. Actually, I feel a little bad that I put the zombies above the vampires in this list, but here we are. I don't know how, but I almost actually forgot to mention Zombieverse Wolverine on this list. I guess maybe it's just because I'm so fixated on vampires, which I guess makes sense. But it's really shocking considering how emotionally scarring and overall how terrifying I find the Zombieverse in Marvel to be. It's just a real horror show over there. Over on Earth Z or Earth 2149, Wolverine isn't just any old zombie either, but becomes one of the zombie cosmic or zombie galacti, after he and a group of chosen few fight over and successfully devour Galactus's remains. For a long time, this granted zombie Wolverine the power cosmic, so not only was he now a terrifying member of the undead with Wolverine's killer instincts and fighting prowess, but then he also had the power cosmic on top of that. Wow. Number 10. Ultimate Storm. While Storm is considered an Omega level mutant and is also the queen of mutant Mars currently in the Ultimate Universe, she isn't quite as powerful. Here, Storm still has her weather manipulation mutant powers, but she also doesn't seem to have immunity to them, and they aren't quite as powerful as her 616 version. Now, I put mutant in quotes there because the mutants really aren't quite the same in terms of their origin in comparison to Earth 616, so I'm not sure if we even really consider them mutants following the revelation that they were created as a result of Super Soldier Serum, basically experimentation runoff. Storm in the Ultimate Universe of Earth 1610 can use her powers to influence the weather by commanding meteorological energy patterns. However, this doesn't mean that she herself is immune to their effects. She can potentially electrocute herself, catch fire, or even catch a cold just from being out in the rain too long, which aren't really symptoms that 616 Storm seems to be vulnerable to. She is still, however, a skilled and agile thief in this universe. Number 9. Queen of Asgard. Storm and Thor have always been a fan favorite ship for many comic book readers and lovers of the Marvel Universe. Why? Well, because they both have weather-based powers, and a lot of people see the God of Thunder as the perfect match for Aurora, goddess and commander of lightning. Though, I do think they both also have thunder and lightning powers themselves individually. A lot of people are like, Thor is like thunder, Storm is lightning. I'm pretty sure they can do both of those things. Still, these two have been shipped for a while, but we haven't gotten a ton of payoff when it comes to prominent alternate realities where they end up together. Enter Thunderstorm. Thunderstorm of course never made it onto the comic book page, but was a character in development that creators Saladin Ahmed and Javier Rodriguez had hoped would get to show up in their Exiles run from 2018. Alas, the story never got on long enough for Thunderstorm to be introduced, which is the only reason this version of Storm, Thunderstorm's would-be mother who ended up as a ruler of Asgard and took Thor for her consort, is ranked so low on this list. She and her daughter never really got to exist, but the concept for Thunderstorm and her family is so awesome I just needed to talk about it. And technically the concept still exists in the world, so we could see Thunderstorm and we could see her mom at some point somewhere in the multiverse. It was an idea that was written down, and the concept art for it is beautiful. I love this design for Thunderstorm. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more Storm lists, goodness knows I want to give you more Storm lists. Also, like, there's just not a lot of Storm content in the world of the internet, and there needs to be more of it for how much we love her. Be sure to let us know you want more of it by giving this video a thumbs up. Also comment below and tell me about how much you love Storm. Number 8. Storm, War to Come. It's the final countdown for this version of Storm. Here in the Millennial Visions short story X-Men War to Come, which apparently takes place on the alternate Earth of 1033, Storm is one of the final remaining X-Men who must fight against an all-powerful Magneto, currently in Rogue's body. This all happened after Magneto learned he only had a few months to live. This prompted him to attack, creating an all-out battle that would decide the future of mutant kind. Storm was gravely injured in that fight but survived. Storm's pain, however, was what inspired Rogue to give it her all in defeating Magneto. She absorbed his powers but also much of his mind and memories. As powerful as Magneto's consciousness was, he was able to overtake Rogue's body. Only Storm, Wolverine, and Nightcrawler remain on this Earth to stop him during a final stand in the Savage Lands. We don't know how that went, but we can assume it went well because Storm was among the 3 that survived, so sounds like it's gonna go well to me. Storm, Wolverine, and Nightcrawler also sounds like a good OP team. Number 7. Mangaverse. There are kind of a couple different versions of Storm when it comes to the Mangaverse, but the one that I like the best is the one who is an all-powerful witch. She is not only a mutant but also a powerful magic user here who was once in a powerful coven with Amanda Sefton. While Amanda Sefton became obsessed with dark magic and corrupted by it ultimately, Storm would go on to join the X-Men. One day, however, she would be forced to face her past as the electromagnetic demon Magnus, once summoned to Earth by Sefton, returned, requiring Storm to take action. This version of Storm, which we see in Marvel Mangaverse X-Men, is also a leader of the X-Men. Which honestly, Storm should be leader of the X-Men. She's a badass, alright? Actually, I can't believe, I feel like that's only happened a few times in the comics, and how disappointing. How disappointing. Number 6. Zombie Storm. Storm in the Earth Z alternate universe of Earth 2149 was actually pretty powerful and capable. Before becoming a zombie, she was one of the few remaining superheroes left alive. She is initially approached by Magneto along with the other X-Men to join him and help save the world. She also is one of the few who makes it onto the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier, where Nick Fury debriefs them on the apocalyptic situation and calls for a cease of hostilities between all villains and heroes, as you know, right now they need all the help they can get to save the Earth from the zombie invasion. Eventually Storm would become a zombie, but even then it is implied that she made it through till at least the zombie Galacti showed up. And let's be honest, not a lot of zombies made it past that point, so if you make it to that point, to me, you're doing pretty good as a zombie in Marvel Zombies. Number 5. Wind Rider. This version of Storm is a hero who survives in the Age of Apocalypse alternate Earth of 295. Here Storm goes on to become enhanced by celestial technology, granting her precognitive powers. She initially takes up the name Wind Rider in this reality and builds up her own nation, attempting to protect her people there from Apocalypse. Despite being captured and defeated by Apocalypse, Wind Rider manages to withstand his mistreatment of her and even resist the telepathic probing of Shadow King. It's pretty crazy, because Shadow King is pretty powerful. She summons a storm using her powers that is so great it creates a huge power outage, thereby giving her the window she needs to escape. Aurora here is given the name Storm by Apocalypse, but later on takes up the codename Aurora Diaz. Number 4. Bloodstorm. Bloodstorm is an alternate version of Aurora Monroe, who was also once known as Storm. She was a member of the X-Men up until she was taken by Dracula, who intended to make her one of his vampire brides. While he succeeded in turning her into a vampire here, she proved too strong for him to control, and she ultimately overthrew and defeated him. Later on, Storm would also face Dracula again in a final showdown, where she would succeed in killing him. Her powers are those of Storm of Earth 616, the main continuity, but in addition to that, she's also a vampire. As such, she can use her powers to turn others into her thralls, make them do her bidding, as she did with Kitty Pryde, who had previously tried to kill her old friend and mentor. Kitty was very much like, no vampires, I don't like it. She also possesses all the skills Storm normally has when it comes to her thievery skills, and presumably some of her fighting skills as well. As a vampire, Bloodstorm also possesses superhuman strength, speed, durability, and shapeshifting powers. She can turn into mist. Number 3. Goddess of Thunder. This alternate version of Storm comes from the multiversal patchwork world known as God Emperor Doom's Battle World. Here Storm wields the mystical hammer known as Stormbringer. She ends up becoming one of the members of God Emperor Doom's elite police force known as the Thor Corps. Even gaining a place on this team is a huge accomplishment. This version of Storm, I believe, still has her own standard powers, but also wields the power of Stormbringer, making her extra electrifyingly powerful. Not only that, but she should get extra power points for just how epic and badass this version of her looks. I love this character design. Number 2. Storm, Goddess of Thunder. Our previous Goddess of Thunder isn't the only one to exist out in the multiverse, by the way, and one of the realities we get a glimpse into through millennial visions, this one being classified as Earth 1027, Storm became more attracted to violent elements of nature, preferring to spend time in the eyes of hurricanes, tornadoes, and storms. She ends up falling in love with Thor, which created a conflict with Tarine, who also loved him. Thor would ultimately be forced to kill Tarine as she was driven mad by Loki's mischievous magic and, well, attacked. As such, Storm would inherit Tarine's hammer and become known as the Goddess of Thunder. Number 1. Storm Phoenix. This version of Storm appeared in the What If story, What If Storm Had the Power of Phoenix. It was featured in issue 79 of the first volume of What If from 1989. Here Storm ends up as the Phoenix instead of Jean, after she creates a tornado to save the shuttle she and her fellow X-Men are as it hurtles down towards Earth from outer space. The real Storm, like Jean, ended up gravely injured and basically comatose, kept in a pod under the sea, while the Phoenix took her place, becoming a sort of an imprint of her and itself melded together, the Storm Phoenix. The Storm Phoenix was all powerful, but while Aurora was fair, just, and compassionate as a person, the Storm Phoenix eventually became cold as ice and cruel to those who disobeyed her laws while she ruled over Earth. Initially, life was basically like a paradise, but as her punishments became more and more unforgiving, the world slowly became a hell where those punished and those even in the vicinity were killed by vicious storms that the Storm Phoenix would unleash on them. Eventually, Storm Phoenix would be defeated. While it's vague how this happened, it is implied that multiple warheads had to be deployed to blow her up, or at the very least just to scare her off. So she is gone, but also it took a lot, because Storm Phoenix.